All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and completely shatter the classic Pavlov's dog myth. Most of us grew up with this really overly simplistic idea that classical conditioning is just about ringing a bell, feeding a dog, and watching it drool. We tend to think of it as a basic, almost mindless biological reflex. But the science actually shows something entirely different. Today, we're going to reveal how your brain is actually a highly sophisticated prediction engine, constantly calculating probabilities and updating its models of the world just to keep you alive. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 5 key areas: the ultimate prediction engine, when learning gets blocked, the 4 key models, why extinction is not forgetting, and finally, how the body strikes back. Section 1, the ultimate prediction engine, beyond simple reflexes.
Think about it like this. If you hear a tone and then boom, food appears right after, do you automatically learn a connection just because they happened at the exact same time? Or is there something way deeper, something a lot more analytical going on under the hood?
So the big difference here really boils down to 2 concepts: contiguity versus contingency. Contiguity just means 2 things happen close together in time. Old theories basically said, yep, that's all you need. But, well, we know now that contiguity is necessary, but it's totally not enough on its own. What your brain actually craves is contingency. It wants to know, does this cue actually predict anything useful? Is it giving me real information? It doesn't just care that 2 things happen together, it wants to know if one actually reliably predicted the other. Let me give you an example that brilliantly illustrates why contingency matters so much more than timing. Imagine an experiment where a tone means you get food 80% of the time. Sounds like a really solid connection, right? But wait, what if that food also magically appears 70% of the time when there's literally no tone at all? Well, your brain is smart. It realizes the outcome happens almost as often without the cue as it does with it. So the tone is actually a terrible predictor, and you get really weak learning. Your brain is basically running these constant statistical probability calculations, filtering out all the useless noise to find the signals that actually matter. Section 2, when learning gets blocked, glitches in the machine. So if our brains are perfect prediction machines, why do we sometimes completely ignore obvious signals right in front of us? Well, even the most advanced engines have glitches. Let's say in week 1, you learn that a specific tone flawlessly predicts food. You've got that association completely locked in. Then in week 2, a light turns on at the exact same time as the tone, and again, you get food. But then week 3 hits. We just flash the light by itself. And nothing. Zero response. This is a fascinating phenomenon called blocking. It's kind of like knowing your front door key works perfectly. If someone hands you a second identical key on the very same ring, you're not going to learn anything new about it. Prior learning literally blocks new learning. Why does this happen? Well, it all comes down to surprise, or what scientists call prediction error. Because that original tone already fully predicted the food, your brain wasn't surprised at all when the food arrived. The light added absolutely zero new information. And since it wasn't informative, your brain simply ignored it to save energy.
And then we have another fascinating glitch, latent inhibition. Think of this as the boy who cried wolf effect. If you repeatedly hear a bell and absolutely nothing happens, your brain actively learns that this bell is totally irrelevant background noise. So later on, if we try to pair that exact same bell with something important like food, you're going to learn that association way, way slower than someone hearing the bell for the very first time. You essentially have to unlearn its irrelevance first because your attention to it is already dropped.
Section 3, the 4 key models. How the brain calculates. To figure all these glitches out, scientists have developed a few competing theoretical models. The most famous is definitely the Rescorla-Wagner model from 1972. It perfectly explains that blocking effect we just talked about using one simple rule. Learning is driven entirely by prediction error. Basically, how surprising is the outcome? If you get your regular paycheck, you're not surprised. Prediction error is 0. But if you get a massive surprise bonus, huge prediction error, and you immediately learn to repeat whatever behavior earned you that bonus. It's a mathematically brilliant way of explaining why we only learn when we're surprised. But the Rescorla-Wagner model has a massive blind spot. It completely fails to explain latent inhibition. Remember the bell that does nothing? Rescorla-Wagner says the prediction error there is 0, so nothing changes. But we know from behavior that pre-exposure slows down future learning. So the Macintosh model from 1975 fixes this by shifting the focus from surprise to attention. Think of a car alarm on your street that goes off every single night for no reason. Because it's a terrible predictor of actual danger, your attention to it drops and you just totally tune it out. So while Rescorla-Wagner focuses on prediction error and Macintosh focuses on attention to predictors, the picture gets even wider. The Pierce-Hall model adds a twist, suggesting we actually pay the most attention to uncertainty, kind of like watching an unpredictable new boss to figure them out. And finally, the comparator hypothesis argues that blocking isn't a failure to learn at all. It suggests you actually did learn about that light, but when it's time to act, your brain compares the light against the tone, and the stronger tone simply outcompetes it. It's a failure of expression, not a failure of learning. Together, these models just show how incredibly active our subconscious really is.
Section 4. Extinction is not forgetting. The fragility of new learning. Shifting gears from theory to the real-world stakes of therapy, what happens when we want to break a bad habit or cure a phobia? The standard protocol is a process called extinction. When a cue, say the sight of a spider, is repeatedly presented without anything bad happening, your conditioned fear response gradually drops to zero. That associative strength falls totally flat.
But we really need to bust a massive myth right here. Extinction is not unlearning. The original memory is never erased. Your brain does not have a delete button. Extinction is actually very fragile, highly context-specific new learning. Your brain is literally building a new inhibitory memory right on top of the old one, actively suppressing the original fear, teaching itself that the cue now predicts nothing.
The absolute proof that the original memory never died is in what we call recovery effects. And this is exactly why someone in therapy might suddenly relapse. For instance, you might have renewal, where you conquer a phobia in the safe context of a therapist office, but the fear comes rushing back when you encounter the trigger in a totally new context. There's also spontaneous recovery, where simply letting some time pass causes the suppressed response to pop right back up. That old memory is always lurking in the background, just waiting for a reason to reactivate. Section 5. The body strikes back. Opponent process theory. Finally, we have to recognize that classical conditioning isn't just about behavioral responses, like drooling or running away. It's deeply physiological. Enter the opponent process theory. This theory states that every intense stimulus triggers a primary, natural reaction in your body. That's the A process. But your body absolutely hates being thrown out of balance. So it instantly triggers an opposing, compensatory reaction to restore equilibrium. That's the B process. Over time, your brain actually conditions itself to anticipate the intense stimulus, firing up that B process early based on environmental cues. Think about skydiving. At first, climbing into the plane is terrifying. That's the A process, just pure fear. When you land safely, you get this huge rush of relief, the B process, trying to calm you down. But after a year of jumping, the pre-jump cues, like the smell of the plane or putting on the harness, actually become conditioned stimuli. They trigger the body's compensatory relief response before you even jump. Your body predicts the fear and neutralizes it in advance, turning the terror into an exhilarating thrill. This exact same mechanism also explains the devastating reality of drug tolerance. When a person repeatedly uses a drug in a specific environment, those environmental cues tell the body to preemptively fire up its defenses, the B process, to fight off the chemical shock. But if that person takes their usual high dose in a completely new environment, like a hotel room instead of their bedroom, those familiar cues are totally missing. The brain doesn't predict the drug, the compensatory response vanishes, and the drug hits the body at full force. This is tragically why so many fatal overdoses happen in unfamiliar places. We've seen how our brains prioritize contingency over timing, how they block out uninformative noise, and how deeply our physical survival relies on these hidden predictions. Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to ponder about this incredible prediction machine inside our heads. If our deepest fears, our highest thrills, and even our physical tolerances are constantly being modulated by our brain calculating prediction errors, are we ultimately just the sum of our conditioning?